Hi everyone. In this video, I will discuss my own personal finance journey that I did and cover all things that I did correctly and incorrectly over the last 18 years to grow a sizable portfolio. This is my first foray into YouTube, so if you like the content, please leave a comment. Please subscribe such that you'll be notified of other videos that I develop. Leaving a comment or selecting the like button will also allow me to develop the right type of content that I believe will be useful for individuals who are viewing this video. Before we get started, I'll also caveat it by saying that I'm not an investment professional. I do have some level of training, but I do not consider myself an investment professional. And so please take that into account as you are going through this content. So as the title of this video would suggest, I started off with a negative net worth, which was primarily comprised of student loan debt. I had $25,000 in student loan debt coming out of college. And over the last 18 years, I've actually been able to build a sizable portfolio of in excess of $2 million. While I haven't received much in the form of money management training per se, what I will say is that I've always abhorred, if you will, any type of debt. I'm not a person who's carried excessive amounts in credit card debt. I'm not somebody, it makes me uncomfortable. And for all intents and purposes, it's always been in my best interest to pay off my student loan debt or any other debt that I have to give me that essential peace of mind. And it's also been very beneficial in freeing up cash flow over the long term and allowing me to make certain investments, which has been extremely beneficial. So I'll go a little bit into some of the good things and the bad things that I've done over the last 20 years or approximately of my career. The one thing I'd say is, in order to pay off my student loan debts, the first thing that I did was I stayed at home after college for about 18 months. And I pretty much dedicated my entire salary, for the most part, on paying off my student loan debt and also paying my parents a little bit of $500 a month, a nominal amount, just in terms of rent, if you will, just to basically put a roof over my head. So I used $500 a month for rent, and I paid off the remaining $25,000 in student loan debt in those 18 months that I stayed home, after which I moved out. Now, there's a ton of stuff that's happened since I was 22 to the time that I'm 40 now, such as I've had 3 jobs, I've had a family, I've got a wife, I've got 2 kids, I've got 2 home purchases over that time, I've got 2 cars that I bought over that time. I've dealt through 2 financial crises, as most people have, the housing bubble crisis being one of them, the pandemic that we are in at this point in time. So basically, life has all impacted my net worth and my financial situation. But I have made some good moves and some bad moves, and I'll talk about all of that in full disclosure as a part of this video, as well as subsequent videos. So let's start off with the dumb stuff, right? The dumb stuff that I've done, and then we'll talk about some of the more positive stuff as we get towards the tail end of the video, because these dumb things that I've done, they've not been catastrophic. They've been unfortunate things that I wish I could take it back, because it certainly would help me in increasing my net worth, perhaps at least a few $100,000 more than what it is at this point. So one of the dumbest things that I did in my younger years, in my 20s really, was not maximizing my 401k. And it wasn't because I didn't want to. It wasn't because I didn't have the capability to. I was earning about, as I said, about $50,000 a year. It wasn't because I couldn't do it. It was because I didn't understand the tax code, and I didn't understand it properly. So let me explain that, right? So over the course of the last so many years, right, the maximum amount you could contribute towards your 401k has ranged somewhere between $16,000 to $19,500 current day, right? So it's somewhere in that range. But the problem with me was I didn't quite understand that that was meant to be the employee contribution max. So if your employer has a matching portion on their own part, you could effectively contribute more than $19,500 current day towards your 401k. But I didn't interpret the code that way. The way I interpreted it is $19,500, let's just use that number for the current day amount, I can only contribute up to that amount, inclusive of the employer contribution amount. So that would mean that as an employee, I would have to contribute less, right? I would have to contribute 15,000, 14,000, 16,000, whatever that number is. I'd have to contribute somewhere in that ballpark, right? And the remainder portion would be my employer contribution. That would essentially get me to a total of 19,500. So it was a poor or improper understanding of how the tax code is essentially laid out. Now, the good thing out of all of this, which I want to make sure is taken away from this video, is I was still contributing. Okay, I was still contributing more than the employer portion. I was still availing of the full benefit of that employer match. I just wasn't putting in as much as I could, right? So one of the key takeaways, at least for me from this perspective, largely is it's helpful to get started. Start as early as you possibly can. And secondly, it's beneficial to understand the tax code and things like that, right? But for all intents and purposes, get started early. Another dumb thing that I did as a younger person was I did not take proper utilization or do proper utilization of the health plans that I was offered to work, right? So I'm pretty risk averse, and what I was effectively doing was I took the lowest deductible plan, right? The one with the highest premium. So the Cadillac plan, if you will, is a term that typically people use when it means the best insurance through work. Now, I've been blessed, okay? I have worked for companies with health insurance the entire time, okay? And I have reasonably good health. Like, I don't take any prescription medication or anything like that. I only go to the doctor occasionally, and when I do, it's for preventative maintenance. That's about it. So for a person in those situations, or the situation that I am in, right, the preferred approach would be to take one of those low premium plans, high deductible plans, have an HSA associated with it, and maximize that HSA as much as possible. That is not something that I did in my 20s to 30s, and what I did subsequent to that, in the stage that I am right now, actually, is I have the highest deductible plan that you can imagine as a part of my health insurance coverage. So somebody viewing this video may think that, oh, he's actually taking on more risk as he's getting older. But the reality of it is that's not the case. I shouldn't have taken the lower, the Cadillac plans earlier in my career. I should have taken the same plans that I am in now. And maybe as I approach my 50s at some point in time, right, over the next 10 years, I may start shifting that high deductible plan to something else over time. But I shouldn't have, right? And I've just gone back to what I should have been doing in that entire time, as opposed to this being perceived as taking on more risk, because that is definitely not the intent as you get older. The next dumb thing that I did in my 20s was not being patient, and essentially following others or not necessarily acting in my own best judgment. So once I left home, I lived with a college buddy of mine for a few years in Chicago. Most of my friends were actually buying condominiums at that point in time. If you start doing the math here, you'll quickly see that this was in the 2005 to 2007 period. And the challenge with that period was it was also the period of the housing crisis. The housing bubble was getting real frothy at that point in time, and around 2007, 2008 is when the crash commenced. So anyway, most of my friends were buying places. I always knew in my mind that I wanted to buy a place at some point in time when I had the full 20% down, such that I wouldn't have to deal with PMI and all this other stuff associated with it. But I was kind of like peer pressured into it, right? I wasn't thinking about it on my own. And I was kind of being greedy and young, to be honest with you. And I was like, well, let's just see how this market's going to run up. I better get a condo right now. And I wasn't thinking about a housing crisis per se. Well, so what happened is I bought a condo in 2008, sold it off in 2013, and I lost 25% between the time of purchase and the time of sale. The other thing that I didn't contemplate properly was HOAs, okay? So in that condo, I had $350 a month in HOA fees. All it covered was a doorman, There was a small gym, there was a deck, and I think it covered some basic cable. But for all intents and purposes, HOAs is for the lack of a better word, it's a ripoff. There is actually no benefit to an HOA. You can't even write it off. It doesn't go up against your as a deduction in your taxes. You know, you can get a deduction at least on your interest and your taxes, but you don't get anything on that HOAs. I've heard of people in Chicago who pay $1,000 a month in HOA fees, $2,000 a month in HOA fees if it's one of those buildings that overlooks the lake over here. It's just absolutely absurd what people effectively do. But, you know, knowing what I do now is I would not have bought a place with HOA fees. Or if I had bought a place with HOA fees, it would be significantly lower, right? It would have been like $50 a year or $100 a year. I live in a house right now with HOA fees, and it's $150 a year. Okay, and it doesn't cover anything, but it's just for some beautification and things like that. But for all intents and purposes, I guess what I'm trying to communicate is HOA fees is a ripoff. You don't want to engage in a property that has HOA fees. And the other problem with HOA fees is they keep going up. They always go up. And at a certain point in time, they could be, you start with 350, they could be 400, they could be 450. And by the time it comes to actually selling that property, you could be sitting at $500, $600 in HOA fees after it's been going up every year. And when those types of things happen, the other people are thinking about it the same way, and the value of that property drops a little bit, right? Because people are not that interested in paying that much in HOA fees. Anyway, it was a big mistake that I made. The other mistake that I made was, as a younger person, was I was more focused on trading than actually investing. So I did my 401ks, I did my Roth IRAs, I had all of that stuff for all intents and purposes maxed out, excluding with the caveat of the 401k that I talked about. But I was also doing a lot of trading. And I've learned the hard way that that is an absolute waste of time and an absolute waste of money to do trading. Largely because every time I bought something, it basically turned to dust. I bought a lot of stock at various stages in my 20s and even some in my early 30s. And you know, to be honest with you, they didn't go anywhere, right? I was thinking more about trading. I was kind of like chasing the market as opposed to actually investing. And there's a big difference between investing and trading, right? If you want to do good investing, actually understand the companies that you're buying and don't just chase the market. And if you don't want to do that, but you want to invest, then invest in like index funds and things like that, which will take off a significant amount of risk for you. Another silly thing that I have done, I view it as being somewhat silly at this stage, is I have only had 3 jobs over the last 20 years, approximately. Now, that's good, right? It's good. It gives you a lot of comfort, right? Make sure that you know what you're doing. You're in good. You're viewed as a value-added contributor, and so on and so forth. But I think there's actually some lot of benefit for people to move around jobs. Every 3 to 5 years, try to find another opportunity and essentially move there. The reason why I say that is a few, right? One, your network actually increases because you know a lot more people who are dispersed in industry, and that could be valuable. 2, you get to see like whatever it is that you're doing, right? Well, whatever area you're working on, you get to see that happening in different companies. So you can understand the pros and cons of it. You can understand what could be considered best practices. You can get a lot of that type of content out of it as well. And the third thing, at least from my perspective, in terms of what's beneficial to shift jobs every few years, is you can also negotiate higher salaries. And as long as you can negotiate higher salaries, it will obviously have a positive impact on your net worth on a longer term basis. So as I said, I've done a lot of silly things, right? But again, nothing catastrophic. I still stuck to the core things, and I kind of kept going with them. I still invested in my 401k. I made some silly things around the real estate piece. But with all of that said, even with the trading thing that I did, it was a very small percentage of my portfolio. It was like less than 5% of my overarching portfolio. I did certain silly things, but it's nothing that I cannot recoup from. And that's what I want to get across as well. Stick to the core, stick to the fundamentals. The other things, if you want to try certain things, take certain risks here and there, you're going to make mistakes. That kind of stuff happens, but it's nothing that you cannot recover from. Now, those are a lot of the silly things that I did. I did a lot of good things too. Okay, some of the stuff we've talked about as a part of this video. But as an example, I did invest in my 401k. I did invest in my Roth IRA. I maxed out my Roth IRA the entire time that I was eligible for a Roth IRA. Right? By eligible for my Roth IRA, what I mean by that is there's income limits. At a certain point, you hit the income limit and you can't contribute anymore. And I did those types of things. Okay, I maxed them out. So that's proved significant benefit, right? I mean, what you'll often hear is a dollar invested in your 20s over a 30-year horizon becomes 85, 88, $90 by the time you're about to retire, right? So those types of things have a significant runway, and I did that as a younger person. I do that to this day as well. The other thing I'll quickly mention is I lived within my means. Okay, I didn't maintain a budget, right? That every dollar and this and that, everything must have a purpose, blah, blah, blah. But I lived within my means, right? It was more so I kind of knew in my head how much I pull in, how much I make, right? I had all my automatic investments set up, right? So that my retirement accounts were automatically filling up, right? My savings accounts were automatically filling up. Those things were just automatically happening. So I knew how much cash I had, and I knew how much cash I was effectively spending, okay? I don't have a desire for a lot of lavish things and things like that, right? But for all intents and purposes, I live within my means. I bought used cars. My first car had 30,000 miles on it, 70,000 miles on it. My second car had 30,000 miles on it. My first car, I sold it off at 130,000 miles. The second car I'm currently driving has got 145,000 miles on it. I did finance these vehicles when I bought them, but I paid them shortly thereafter. I only financed it primarily as a negotiation tool, which I'll talk about in a different video. One of the best decisions that I also made was essentially being debt-free, right? So I paid off my student loans as quickly as I could. I paid off my cars, as we just talked about, as quickly as I could. This has allowed for cash flow. And as long as you have cash flow, you can invest it and you can have a different purpose associated with it. I did that, and that has proved to be beneficial. And I learned from my mistakes, right? So we talked about me buying that place in the housing bubble, the condominium. We talked about that already. My next place, the place that I currently live in, I actually bought it when the market was completely depressed in Chicagoland. Okay, I bought it in 2013. I learned from my mistakes. This is when I wanted to buy, and that is when I bought it. And the property, I bought it significantly under market value, and while Chicago real estate, at least in the suburbs, is not like this, it's not something that you would experience in like California or New York or wherever else. It's more like stable, right? But for all intents and purposes, even with that stability, I've been able to see some appreciation in value without doing a whole lot of work inside the house. The gist of this is I've made some good decisions. I've made a slew of bad ones as well. However, considering where I am now, it goes to show that you can get past these mistakes fairly easily. They are forgiving. They are forgivable. You can get past them. You just need to make sure that you are understanding certain principles, certain things, and we'll talk about that in subsequent videos. But a lot of those things that I did on the positive that I covered off in this video are some of those fundamentals. The second thing that I'll say, right, is while you make these mistakes and things like that, don't get stuck, right? What I mean by that is don't get stuck and make the situation worse and worse and worse. Be agile, be dynamic. Try to find out other things to do. Try to get out of it, right? Move, shake, right? Do things. If you see you're getting into a situation, get out of it, right? It's very important being nimble. And if we're not being nimble, we're going to be in trouble. So that's the other thing that I would encourage everyone to take away from this video as well, and something that I'll obviously focus on a fair bit with some actual tangible experiences, and we'll talk about that in subsequent videos as well. So in further videos, I will peel back a lot of these layers. I'll talk about things that I actually invested in, right? What did I put in my 401k? I'll talk about where I live in Chicago, right? Where I lived, where I am now, what the values were, and things like that. I'll talk about a lot of those things. I'll talk about some of the trades that I made and the stupidity around all of that. I'll cover it, right? And hopefully you guys can take away from this, some of the things that we talked about in terms of just being dynamic and not getting bogged down in mistakes and things like that. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please hit the like button or the thumbs up button. That will definitely help me in terms of understanding what are some of the areas, or if this is the video type of content that people are interested in. Put comments in the bottom as well. That way, if there is something specific that people want to cover, I'll prioritize those from an interest perspective. And of course, subscribe to the channel as well. And if you can subscribe to the channel, then as I pump out new videos, they will definitely fall into your feed. So thanks again, thanks for watching, and I'll connect with you soon.